Good afternoon, sorry. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Maddie Cohen, the Assistant Director of the Thomas Usiloff Business Center, and we will get started in just a few minutes. We have a great session for you today with Neil Schwartz and Mark Sullivan from Sports Market Analytics and SBRnet. In case you don't know about this resource, it's a fabulous database for sports business research, and it's available in the Business Center. Neil and Mark will demonstrate the kinds of data that you can find in this resource. Before we get into the program, we just have a few details we have to review. The library uses Zoom for this program and does not own Zoom. Zoom has its own privacy policy that you can read on their own webpage. Zoom also has closed captions, so if you need them, just click on the CC button on the screen. To understand how you and the library use this service, please read the library's privacy policy, especially the section that refers to third-party library service providers. And before we start, please place all of your questions in the Q&A. You could also put questions in the chat, but sometimes they go too fast. This program will be recorded and you will receive an email with a link to the recording in a day or two. Now some information about our speakers. Neil Schwartz is president of SBRnet Incorporated, has more than 2 decades of marketing and consumer research experience in sports, fitness, and active lifestyle categories. Previously, Neil worked for Sports Scan Info from Sports One Source, in addition to heading the research team at the Sports and Fitness Industry Association. Neil has been a featured speaker for many industry events and conferences. He's well respected for his work with leading financial and investment firms, top brands and retailers in the sports footwear and apparel categories. Mark is a business journalist who has held senior editorial posts at Women's Wear Daily, Sports Style, Sporting Goods Business, Footwear News, and Golf Pro magazine. At WWD, he won the Atrium Award for his coverage of the American fashion industry. Mark was later named the vice president at Fairchild Publications and became general manager of the Style Channel, a joint venture between Fairchild, Disney Digital, and America Online. In 2005, Mark was one of the founders of Formula 4 Media, which published a range of B2B titles and produced the Running event, which grew to become the largest B2B conference and trade show in the world. The Running event and its associated media properties were sold to Diversified Communications in 2018. But now let's, without further delay, go to the presentation. So here is Neil and Mark.
Madeline, thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks for inviting Neil and I to be with everyone today. And it's today is a great sports day, right? You have the first round of the Masters, you have opening day for the New York baseball teams. So, you know, April, I think, is my favorite sports season of the year. You know, just ended up a fantastic NCAA tournament. So just real quick, a little bit about SBRnet and Sports Market Analytics. It is a business that is 20 plus years old. Neil and I bought the business about 1.5 years ago, and we have really worked on sort of bringing it into the modern era. There's so much conversation today about data in the regular world, but particularly in the sports world. And because I think the sports world on the field, off the field is so data intensive, I think today's title about so much data, so little time is incredibly appropriate. If you look at the grid on the right-hand part of your screen, you can see just a number of the different data sets that we have on our website. Everything from attendance, how many people attended Denver Nuggets games last year, we have that. How many people bought trading cards, we have that. How many people between the ages of 14 and 24 played pickleball last year? We have that data as well. So we try and have everything that anyone could possibly want to know about the sports business, and really pride ourselves on being a one-stop shop for all of that. So really our calling card, I think that we're best known for at Sports Market Analytics, is our fan behavior study. We every year do a comprehensive piece of research that is proprietary to us, that we own, that really measures fan behavior. And Neil is really going to talk in detail about that today. So everything from what team do you root for? How do you show that support? By buying t-shirts and sweatshirts and maybe even betting. What is your social media engagement? You know, that's become such a big part of sports, where people, it's allowed fans to really be part of the game. You know, I know that's something that I enjoy, whether I'm watching a Syracuse University basketball game or a Met game, sort of going back and forth with my friends, and it allows us to sort of communicate with one another while the game is going on. In terms of how data is used in the business today, like I said, we are living in sports in the data modern data world, and there's been so much talk about Michael Lewis's book a number of years ago, the Moneyball book, that really focused on player data and measuring data about on-field performance. You know, how many base hits, what's a player's tendency, whether it's in baseball to pull the ball to the left side of the diamond, in football, you know, how many attempts did this particular receiver get, how many targets, and what's his success ratio. That data is all well and good. We don't really live in that world. We really live in the world of what I call business intelligence. And these are just a couple examples of how data is used in a business intelligence capacity. A lot of times, strategic decisions. I know Neil has been recruited to do two really interesting pieces of research where he was able to take our data and customize it. For example, there was a group in central New York that was looking at creating one of those modern sports facilities where athletes can come and play soccer, softball, lacrosse, all that. So what they had Neil do was really drill down into our participation data and measure what are the number of lacrosse players, soccer players, softball players in these particular zip codes. And Neil was really able to do that and confirm to these guys that they had indeed selected a good location for their planned facility. Another project we worked on for a major sporting goods retailer was merchandise assortments. These guys were getting ready to open some new stores, and they said, all right, in the zip code surrounding these store locations, what are the major activities of the people who live here? So again, we were able to go into our participation data and say, yeah, in these particular locations, you know, you're over-indexing on hunting and fishing. Therefore, we think that for these particular store locations, you should probably heavy up on hunting and fishing merchandise. So just a couple examples of how people use the data for strategic purposes. In terms of sports marketing, I mean, sports marketing is a red hot field. I've been very fortunate over the last year to be an adjunct professor at Montclair State in New Jersey and teach sports marketing. And, you know, it's been so interesting to sort of see it through those eyes and see it through the eyes of my students. But if you look at sports marketing today, you have insurance companies, car companies, consumer products companies, all spending money heavily against sports for a number of reasons that we can talk about later. And the data really helps measure the effectiveness of those different sponsorships, whether it's a team, whether it's a league, or whether it's a particular athlete. People also will use our data quite frequently for their entrepreneurial ideas. And I think there is this history in the sports business about, you know, the eureka moments that sort of crazy inventors have in developing a product, particularly in the footwear category, which is the largest and most lucrative category out there. So anyone who's very familiar with the story of Nike, Nike really got its start when there was a college track coach at the University of Oregon. Bill Bowerman was his name. He took a pair of running shoes, put them in his wife's waffle iron, and truly he had a eureka moment where he developed a new outsole that really went on to become Nike's first signature product. Well, that is a great story and a great legend. But most companies, when they are developing product, you would be surprised at how sort of analytical they are. So just to wrap up quickly on the sport market, three brands that Neil and I are very familiar with: a footwear company called Hoka Ane Ane, On Running, which is a brand out of Switzerland, and Under Armour. I think these companies serve as great examples of, a couple guys who had an idea, took it and developed it, and all those brands now, less than 20 years old, they're all billion-dollar brands. So that, I think, is the excitement and the lure of the sport market. I started to talk a little bit about product design and development, and like I said, there are those eureka moments, but most often these companies, particularly the bigger companies, before they even go into the R&D lab, they will really do an evaluation of the market. Tuesday, I spent the day with the president of a major footwear brand, and he was explaining to me their product development process. So it starts with data analysis. What price point do we want to be in? What category do we want to be in? Who's our target consumer? And then, and only then, once the company has sort of created that product brief using all those different factors, then they will turn their designers loose and they'll start to evaluate material, color, all those other factors. So again, I think it's so interesting how even product design and development has become so dependent on data. Last thing I want to talk about is, so many people approach Neil and I because so much of our work is done in the academic market with different colleges. Of course, a lot of the students will come to Neil and I and say, hey, I really want to work in the sports business. I love sports. I'm passionate about it. How can I break into the business? So Neil and I have created this web series called My First Job in Sports, where we interview people who are typically on their second or third rung of the career ladder. And we talk to them about how they broke into the business and how they are managing their career. For anyone who's interested or has a child who's interested, I highly recommend taking a look at these. So instructive and quite frankly, inspirational in terms of how these people got started and how they're moving up the rungs. Great stories, some commonalities between them, but really useful tutorial. And like I said, certainly inspirational for anybody looking to break into the sports business. So having said all that, I want to turn things over to Neil, who's going to take you through some data. You heard about Neil's background. I refer to him as our chief data nerd. So Neil, have at it.
I have to add that to my business card, CDN,
Absolutely.
Chief Data
Yes.
Nerd. But Mark, I want to thank you for that great analysis of sports market analytics at SBRnet. We are very proud of one, our decision to buy this, but then two, what we've been able to do with it in terms of developing it and enhancing it and providing additional data. I also want to echo what Mark said initially about thanking Madeline. I want to thank Madeline Cohen at the New York City Public Library. She was instrumental in putting this together and kind of pushed it along. So Madeline, thank you very much. So before we start looking at data, which I know, as the chief data nerd is what we should be doing, it's always been my feeling that when you look at data, I first want to focus on process, because while I want to use data to be able to answer the tough questions, I got to ask the right questions before I know how to answer them. And so using data to help answer the tough questions are, what are those questions? And our data, especially our sports fan data, is able to answer a whole lot of these questions. But as I'm going through my process, and even as I'm going through data today, one of the things I always keep in the back of my mind is who, what, when, where, why, and how. because I do know that if I can answer those questions during the course of my process, I will be able to get to the answers that I am looking for. Just a little bit about, as Mark said, our landmark product is the SBRnet Sports Fan Study. It's 18 sports. I mean, everything from Major League Baseball to golf, tennis, auto racing, you name it, we're covering it if the fans are watching. 65 different categories of data, everything from demographics to gambling habits to sponsorship influence to attendance, you name it. The best part is we've got 5 years of historical data. Mark knows every time we talk, I'm always talking about trends, and more trends. Well, with 5 years of data, you're able to really look through it and understand, what are the trends, and then being able to look at those trends and understand them and how will they relate to the decisions or the answers that I am trying to get to. What I'm going to do now is I'd like to start looking at some data. Now, as I always say when we're looking at data and trying to tell a story, because that here is really the ultimate goal. And by the way, this is actual data from the Sports Market Analytics site through our most recent study. Now, it is data that was collected in 2021, but we call it our 2022 study because that's when the data is released. And I also want to remind folks, when you're looking at this data, we're looking at everything in thousands. So for instance, for Major League Baseball in 2017, that's actually 109 million. So we always add 3 zeros to all of the whole numbers that we have here. So again, the other thing I want to talk about is in 2020. In 2020, we had a strange situation. Nobody was going to games. Going to games is, in fact, a big part of the fan experience. What happens when there are no games to go to? So we have this, what they like to call black swan event in 2020. And we're going to talk as we go how to factor that in to looking at data. So again, we want to look at trends. And in this case, we're looking at attendance and viewership. We took the major team sports and we looked at it over a 5-year period. So we can see, for instance, as an example, Major League Baseball had 109 million. I'm going to do a little rounding here. 109 million fans that either attended or went or watched a game. That number has declined down to 98 million, 828 during our 2021 season or 2021 year. But we're going to talk a little bit more about how to kind of use that data and how to also smooth it out a little bit, because 2020 does present some challenges. So now we take the same data that we just looked at and we start to add what I like to call the next chapter. Because like a good story, like a good book, there are chapters. And each chapter goes into a different area, a different story. And we want to try to build on them as much as possible. So in this case, I added 2 new columns on the right-hand side. I added in a 4-year average of fan activity. I then added in a year-over-year comparison that looks at 2021 versus the previous year. But I think it's all important to be able to look at that 4-year average, because what it helps to do, it helps to smooth out the outlier. What's the outlier? The outlier is 2022. So in the previous slide, we saw that some sports were actually growing. The NFL, in 2017, they had 128 million, and actually, let's go 129 million. They're up to 143 million as of our most recent collection. So here's a sport that's been able to grow their base, while the Major League Baseball, as we can see, their base is declining. So you look at data, you build a story, you start to layer on different data points or different views of the data. And in this case, what that does is that it helps you further your story. one last thing also is Mark knows the other word I use aside from trends a lot is benchmarking. Everyone needs to be able to establish benchmarks. I have this little saying that you can't monitor what you can't measure. Now, I don't think I was the author of that, but I have stolen it, and I use it quite frequently. So in this case, I created the benchmark of the 4-year average, because again, what it does is that it smoothed out the anomaly of 2020 a little bit. So again, as we start to look at this, what I like to also do is, and as we dive deeper, is to create a graphic representation. You know, numbers are wonderful. They are. But sometimes you really need to show the picture. You know, who's up, who's down. And if you look at the far right-hand side, I did what I call the trend view. So you can get a good look over the last 5 years. What's the trend view been looking like? Are the numbers declining or are the numbers going up? But again, what it does is it gives you a story, a roadmap. It gives you that next place to go. Because what might be your next step? Well, for me, I would say let's start looking at demographic data. Let's start looking at separate subsets of fans. And all of this data is available on the Sparks Market Analytics site. So what I'm talking about is really the natural progression of things. But what might you also want to do? You also might want to start comparing league over league, team over team, because all of these things represent a different story. So here now is a little bit of our deeper dive into Major League Baseball. And one of the things that we've been talking about, and I talked about this with Mark a couple of weeks ago, is that baseball is really facing in a lot of ways what I like to call a zero-sum game. As someone grows, someone goes. So as we do our deeper dive into baseball, what are we finding out? Well, look at attendance from 2017 all the way to 2021. That's a fairly substantial drop. Look at just attended only number. Again, fairly substantial drop, even coming out of the pandemic. But look at the viewed numbers. Again, a little bit better in terms of a smaller drop. But look at the streaming numbers. In 2017, Major League Baseball, and I'll do the rounding thing again, had around 15 million people streaming. They're now close to 20 million people streaming. So as someone grows, streaming, somewhere or something goes. In this case, it's attendance. So again, our data allows you to be able to drill down deeper into each one of the stories that allows you to be able to understand what's driving. And remember one thing: who, what, when, where, why, and how. This is the how. How are people ingesting, watching, viewing, attending, of the various events? In this case, we drilled into Major League Baseball a little bit.
So Neil, I'm gonna jump in here a little
Sure.
bit on streaming. No surprise that streaming number is going up, and I think in 2022 it'll go up even more. I'm assuming that most of the people at this webinar today are based in New York, and as a New York baseball fan, I think the Yankees are streaming 21 games. The Mets are streaming a number of games. So games that have traditionally been on free TV or part of most basic cable packages, as a fan, you're going to have to figure out how to stream or figure out how to pay for those games. So I think that streaming number will just be more and more a part of the baseball fan experience going forward.
Thanks, Mark. As more people were talking about data and data analytics, I think it's really important to understand that you can't do analytics without great data. And, one of the basic ways to be able to do, analytics is to be able to do, simple regressions in order to be able to take a look at and calculate, what is that consolidated growth rate going to look like by 2025? Will baseball be able to turn things around, or will it get worse? So again, being able to use data like what you have on the sports market analytics site from SBRnet can really help you do the analytics. But remember, you cannot do data analytics without great data. And that's where we start, and that's where we shine. But now let's move into like another topic. This is like the next chapter. I started to drill down into baseball a little bit, but in drilling down, I took a look at sports gambling. Right now, there is no topic that is discussed more frequently and more often right now than sports gambling. I was watching, in fact, back on the record with Bob Costas a little bit this morning while I was drinking coffee, and 3 times during the hour show, they talked about sports gambling. It's everywhere right now. And as more and more states come online with online sports gambling, it's going to be talked out even more. But let's look at the sports gambling numbers that are up on the screen right now. And I want to take you all the way to the right first. Look at those numbers for golf. Golf has seen the largest incremental gain in the number of golfers, golf fans that are gambling on sports.
So, Neil, let me jump in here. As a golfer and as someone who has spent plenty of time around golf clubs and golf caddy yards over the years, there is this perception that golfers will bet on anything. For everyone out there who ever saw the movie Tin Cup, there's a great scene in that movie with Kevin Costner where a bunch of guys are standing around a golf pro shop and they're betting some serious money on who can chip a ball through the bar into a garbage can. And, it's funny, that scene, I think, was sort of played for laughs. But if you look at the data, you can see there's a lot of truth to it. Golfers will bet on just about anything. And I think, Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, I think our numbers also show that golfers are more likely than the regular population to bet on other sports other than golf.
Mark, that's true. Golfers have really shown their true colors, when it comes to sports gambling. And as you said, they do love to gamble, not just on golf events, but they love to gamble really on all sports. It's like it's somehow burned into their DNA. But now let me take you to the left-hand side, Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball fans are gambling more than they had in the past. But what does that tell you? What story does that tell? I know what it says to me. And what it says to me is that while Major League Baseball is having a problem holding fans, once they have them, they're able to engage them, and sports gambling might be an incredible way to be able to engage them. Look, it's not going away. No matter how you feel about sports gambling, it's not going away. In fact, I think in the month of January, when they first legalized sports gambling in New York, I heard something about that they did over $1 billion in what they call a handle. So there was a total of $1 billion run through the various online gaming platforms in 30 days out of the state of New York alone.
Neil, if I could just jump in on that baseball data, I think one of the things you'll see, we talk about trends and things we'll see going forward. I think what you're going to see going forward, particularly as it relates to baseball, is more in-game betting. And baseball lends itself so much to proposition bets. For example, somebody told me that there will even be proposition bets on, will the next foul ball go to right field or left field? So people are going to be able to bet on anything. And I think you'll see more betting actually incorporated into telecasts. So I think that's something to watch for. And baseball, while they are certainly having their attendance problems and their relevance problems, I think when it comes to gambling, maybe more people will start to watch baseball just for the gambling action.
One other issue about gambling also is that with all the sports gambling and especially online gambling, it's put a lot of pressure on stadium operators to be able to provide enough bandwidth to be able to accommodate in-game betting and in-game wagering and also in-game fantasy playing. So that is something that, I think a number of different implications. But what I want to do now is I want to talk a little bit about, go back to my storytelling and my drill down, because I want to think now, okay, let's go back to the who, what, when, where, why, and how for a minute on sports gambling. I want to look at, let's say, gambling by generations. The who are gambling on sports? The what is their intention to spend more or less in gambling in the 12 months? Where? A breakdown of where sports gamblers are placing their bets. I threw a little tidbit in there. Mark reminded me of this. 14% of baseball fans are still using like their neighborhood bookie to place bets. Now, I don't have that number for all the sports, but my guess is it's going to be probably very similar to that. But as you see more and more states implement online gambling, you'll probably start to see that number change a little bit. And then how? Which sports gambling platforms are winning the market share competition? On Sports Market Analytics, we literally can tell you which one of the sports gambling platforms are getting market share on a sport by sport basis, a league by league basis, and a team by team basis. Now, the interesting thing about this is that once you have that data, you're then able to project what sports gambling operators might be able to pull out of the various states in terms of gambling as they come online. Whoops. So since we're in New York, I thought, hey, let's talk a little bit about Major League Baseball, and I'm calling it with a New York kind of state of mind. And of course, that means we're looking at both the Mets and the Yankees. And I just kind of cherry picked a few random data points here. But I want to remind before we start, when we look at attendance, there's a lot of different attendance numbers out there. A number of people are reporting tickets sold and using that as attendance. Of course, that revenue is already generated, and by rights, it should be counted. Our number looks at people actually attending games, what they say they are going to do or have done. So there might be some differences when you look at our attendance figures versus, say, attendance figures, from Major League Baseball based on ticket sales. But let's call out a couple of things here. Number one, on the first line is that 23% of Mets fans attended a game last year versus, I'll do the old rounding thing again, 17% of Yankee fans. Mark, I know you're a Met fan. What do you think causes that, or what do you think creates that?
Well, I think Met fans have a reputation for being incredibly loyal through some tough circumstances, as the team has been sort of bungled in its management and ownership over the years. So that number doesn't surprise me at all.
So we give you an opportunity to be able to compare team by team, league by league, again, all on the Sports Market Analytics site. Let's drop down to males 18 to 34, and we see that 14% of Mets fans are 18 to 34 men years of age, whereas only 8.2% of Yankee fans. Does that create an opportunity for the Mets to be able to develop more with that 18 to 34-year-old audience? Is that, in fact, an audience where sports gambling could be a way to develop, that part of the audience, or older folks? Now, remember, sports gambling, of course, starts at 21, but again, you have the ability to be able to look at different demographic segments to be able to allow you to drill down, tell more of the story. Let's drop down all the way to the bottom of the page to sponsorship influence. This is an area that I love, because if I was a brand, I was somebody that was going to, let's say, decide, do I want to sponsor the Mets or the Yankees? Do I want to sponsor the Giants or the Jets? What kind of influence does advertising or sponsorship messaging have with the fans of these various teams? Now, in this case, let's look at not at all influential. In not at all, the lower number is better. So in this case, the lower number that is that only 42.47%, let's go 43% for rounding sake, of Yankee fans are not influenced at all versus 55% of Met fans that are not influenced at all. As an advertiser, as a marketer, as somebody who's looking at the market in general, this is a great directional tool to help guide you where to put your dollars. And I figured the last thing we talk about here would be women's sports. So I was recently at the Sloan Data Conference up in Boston, and I have to say one of the most frequently talked about topics, aside, of course, from sports gambling, was it's time for women's sports to really step up. But it's more than just about the NBA, the WNBA, I'm sorry. You know, when people think of women's sports, they do think, first and foremost, of the WNBA. Well, we don't do that. We've added in categories for what we call other women's sports, which kind of groups both professional and amateur sports together. So we're not just focusing on the WNBA, because frankly, if you focus just on the WNBA, it can give you a little bit of a deceptive view, especially when you're looking at attendance. What we did here was we looked at women's sports, but we looked at it by generation. And again, our data allows you to be able to break it by the individual generations. So when you look at the data, yeah, the attendance numbers don't look all that great. About 332,000 people attended a WNBA game last year, whereas 3.4 million watched the WNBA game, and 3.9 million or 4 million watched other women's sports. So in reality, other women's sports present a wonderful opportunity. And again, this data is all part of sports market analytics. You know, one other interesting point here is that the WNBA in particular has gone on this youth movement. They are really going after younger fans. Younger fans aren't going to games, but they are watching, and they're doing more streaming. So again, our data allows you to understand the nuances, build a story, answer the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions, and then be able to tell that story in a more cohesive, data-driven fashion. Hey, that's really all that we have for today's presentation. There's an awful lot of data on the SBRnet site. You can access it via the Business Center at the New York Public Library. All of the data that we looked at here, with the exception of maybe some of the team-by-team data, isn't available, but that will be. We're going to work with the library to make sure all the things you saw here will, in fact, be available. Madeline, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do have a few. Let me just get to them. Okay, in the opening slides, Mark had mentioned that how your data can be used for product design and related activities. Can you be a little bit more specific on that?
Sure. You want me to take that one, Neil?
Sure.
Yeah. So as I said, Tuesday I had the good fortune to spend the day with a guy who's president of an up-and-coming footwear brand called Ultra, and he really talked, just as I mentioned earlier, that before they evaluate materials, color, style, any of that, they will really do sort of a white paper analysis and figure out where are the gaps in the market in terms of price point. What does the competitive set look like? You know, where is the white space? Where can we move into it? And to me, it's interesting how the sports market really does take sort of a data analytics approach to things. I know in my bio, you mentioned that I started my career in journalism working for Women's Wear Daily, and the fashion business was great. I loved covering the fashion business. And the sports business is so different than fashion. The fashion business, you know, you'd be walking through the garment center and you'd see a guy pushing a cart full of purple fabric down the street, and some designer would see it and go, "Damn, purple! That's going to be my theme for the season." Extremely, very different from how the sports market looks at things.
Over a number of years, a number of up-and-coming brands, especially lately in the sports technology category, fitness measurement equipment, fitness technology, look to data and have looked to Mark and I to be able to help identify what are the opportunities, for a product that they're looking to, roll out. So, Madeline, you have the next question?
Yes. Right now, I know you mentioned a little bit about sports gambling, but right now about half of the states allow legal online sports gambling. How much of a factor is that in your sports gambling numbers in terms of the sports business analytics, market analytics?
Yeah, it's a big factor. It's about half the states. I think we're up to about 30, maybe. I think, through the pandemic, we were at about 23. I think it's up to about 30 now. By the way, it'll never get to 100%. I think what they're projecting by 2025 is that 48 states will legalize online sports gambling in their states. But I do think, though, that what you're able to do is to take a lot of the data that we have, especially on a team-by-team basis, and you're able to segment them regionally or even by state, and then be able to look at what are the propensity or what the likelihood of the various fans of the various sports are to be utilizing gambling. And then you can look at the states where online gambling is legal and look and do a data analysis, do some correlation work and determine, what's the gap between the haves and the have-nots. When I say haves, have online gambling, don't have online gambling, and then be able to create a projection and understand how important will it be when they finally have California in the mix or Florida in the mix or any of the other states that do not allow online sports gambling currently.
Yeah, Neil, interesting point about that. New Jersey was my home state, by the way. New Jersey was one of the first states to come online. And there were stories about people who lived in Manhattan who on their lunch hour used to take the path to New Jersey. So their phone would geolocate and show they were in the state of New Jersey. They'd place a bunch of bets on their lunchtime and then run back into Manhattan where gambling was still illegal. So, I think you see that sort of thing happening as well. And you will see it particularly as certain states are slower to come online. You'll see people just driving over the state line to place bets.
Madeline, any more questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Do you have a report on dollar values of like attendance and like rise in attendance, deduction in attendance? Do you have dollar values even in gambling?
Well, we don't. We have dollar values in the respect of, how the delta, let's just say more or less year over year, but we don't necessarily have that sports gambling data. We do have it from other sources. So, and attendance figures, ticket sales, concessions, amount spent on licensed products, that we do have on the site.
Yeah.
So that data is available.
And Neil, I don't know if we can give away all the goodies that we have coming down, but there's a company out in the Midwest who we are very close to working with. Neil, this reminds me, we need to get them on the phone this week. But there is a company out there that actually publishes, I think they call it the Fan Cost Index or something like that. But it talks about how much it costs for average families to go to games. And there's all sorts of great detail. We hope to bring that information online very quickly. So that's a great question, by the way.
That
Thank
is.
you.
Anything more, Madeline?
Yeah, one more question. Let's see. I know you mentioned, I think this was Mark, I'm not sure, but something about My First Job in Sports web series.
Sure.
Someone says, my child is interested in getting involved in sports business and he wants to major in that in college. So could you just say, what are some of the takeaways you can learn that you've heard from some of the people you've interviewed for this series?
Another good question. So we've interviewed probably about 13 or 14 people. And I would say a couple of the takeaways that I would feed to anyone who's interested in getting a job in sports, old, young, whatever, is, first of all, the sports business is so broad and so diverse, and we tried to make sure the interviews reflected that, where we interviewed the guy who runs the sports tourism business, or the sports what's that called?
The Dallas Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Yeah, and one of my favorite interviews we did, where he talked about everything they do to attract sporting events to their local community. And then we interviewed people who worked as agents, people who work selling footwear. So again, the sports business is so broad. There were so many jobs available, and some of these fields we're referencing, like gambling, super quickly growing, not real good English by me there, but rapidly growing fields of employment. And I would say the path for a lot of these people very different. You had people who worked in college and got internships and parlayed those. And then we also have a guy who's a rapidly rising executive in the NBA. Neil and I, in fact, think he'll be commissioner of the NBA one day. And he really got his start in the financial world, developed some skills, developed some experience, built his resume, and then parlayed that into a job with the NBA. And if you listen to his interview, he's adamant that that's the way to go. But you'll talk to, and you'll hear some other people who really went right from the college classroom into their first job. So again, many different paths. No one answer for that one.
As Mark can tell you, one of the questions that I typically ask every guest is, what are those things, or what is that skill that, now that you're in the job market, you wish you had maybe paid more attention to when you were in school, or even took more classes? And it always seems to come down to data analytics, using Excel or using other data analytics applications. But it always seems to come down to, I wish I would have paid more attention in statistics, or I wish I would have paid more attention in data analytics. And, more and more, those that can, work with data, aren't afraid of it, and incorporate it, are the ones that are going to be able to, climb higher, climb faster, and get a lot of these great jobs that, as Mark mentioned, are now open in the sports business. Any more, Madeline?
No, I think that was it for now, but I just want to encourage everybody who's in this webinar to visit us at the Business Center, the library, which is now on 455 Fifth Avenue. We're on the 5th floor, and we've got Sports Market Analytics is one of our databases that we feature. We have many other databases as well. So if you're doing any research in marketing or in sports marketing or any other topic, clothing, sports, sports apparel, they've got fabulous data in this product, and you can access it free at the library. So we are open many hours, Monday through Sunday, and 7 days a week. So visit us, at your leisure.
Yeah, I want to thank again Madeline Cohen for setting this up and making and pinning me down to a date. I want to thank everyone at the New York Public Library who helped us with the technical aspects and supported us. And last, I want to thank you, New York Public Library, for being a longtime subscriber to Sports Market Analytics. We love our clients. We like working with them. And lastly, if anybody has a good idea that they want to get a little help on, go to our website and go to our information form and let us know. And, we're always here to help, somebody who's looking to, roll out a new product, or even somebody looking to get a job in sports. Thank you, Madeline.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care. Thanks, Neil and Mark.